Owain Yeoman and Tim Kang aren't real cops, but they're
TV police!
the TV police.
TV police!
Yes. Yes.
Top of the morning to you all. If that
You
doesn't
know what?
wake you up, I don't know what
redo
will.
that. Let's redo that. Sorry. We had the good vibe going.
I can do the vibe again. That's what I get paid for.
Recreate
Keep bringing the vibes.
Recreate the vibe over and over and over. Okay, now I'm ready. Yeah.
Are we recording now?
We are recording now.
Oh, cool. TV police!
There it is. Okay, we did it. We did
There you
it.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
made it.
because I was worried that you thought I wouldn't be able to bring the vibes.
No,
But
you did.
here they are. Just brought them.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even know that really in real life right now, I'm probably at a 2 or 3 out of 10.
Really?
In
Wow,
terms
you're-
of general all-round wellness.
You
know, that's-
okay.
You know, this is why I think I don't know if I've done much more acting than I'm doing right now, because
Isn't
putting
it-
on the
isn't it
semblance
week-
of a human being.
Isn't it week
Huh?
5 now that you've been
This is
under the weather?
bronchitis check.
Yeah.
TV police, chest infection. Yeah, so this is week 5. And interesting that Misread starts with Rigsby being deathly unwell.
Deathly ill.
Because as
right.
I was watching that opening sequence on the boat, you and I were talking on the phone last night, and Tim just turned to me and he said, "You sound terrible. Like, what is going on?" Like, and for the last few weeks, I have been a walking mass of COVID and bronchitis and chest infection, and they've all just been sort of helping each other out.
Yeah.
One goes down, the other comes up, and so
Right.
just as I feel like I'm getting over it, and I am a terrible patient, I think that this is.
But you're
the great thing.
handling it beautifully, though. You
Thanks. This is exciting. So episode 21. Wow, I feel like we got the end of the season in our sights.
Yeah. You got penultimate coming up, and then that's it, the finale. Yes.
Episode 21, Misread, directed by Martha Mitchell, written by our dear friend Ken Woodruff, was it? I think Ken wrote
That
this
was
one, right?
Ken,
Yeah.
yep.
And would you fancy diving in and doing us a little TV police synopsis
Sure.
on today's episode?
Yeah. CEO and founder of software company Gaia Matrix, Jim Gulbrand, is found murdered on his boat. The CBI team investigates Gulbrand's girlfriend, Brooke Harper, who is a con artist, his business partner, Rick Bregman, and ex-wife, Catherine Stubbs Gulbrand. Prior to his death, Gulbrand stashed $10 million in cash, giving every one of those individuals motive. Jane uses Brooke in a scheme to find the hidden cash, and in the process uncovers another con artist at work.
So a very, very favored theme of The Mentalist here. Well, I put at the top of my notes, con on con. And I think that that's a recurrent theme throughout this season. And it's interesting, right off the bat, I wanted to get your take on this because I've noticed a bit of a pattern here. Would you say that it's a fair observation that Patrick Jane seems to have a little bit of a blind spot for the female con artist? I'm thinking of your Christina Fry's, your Brooke Harper's.
That's what
What's
popped
the
in
name
my
of the
head
woman
immediately.
who was the psychiatrist, the psychotherapist as well, who helped Jane out? She
Elizabeth
was in The
Rome's
Monkey.
character. Yeah,
Elizabeth Rome's character, right.
Yeah, I don't remember the name.
It was interesting for me because clearly the idea of the art of the con is not a new one. That's, at the absolute heart of our show. What I thought was interesting, though, was this sort of dawning realization that Jane really does have a blind spot when it comes to apparently beautiful women who are also quite established in charlatanism or conning. And that kind of dawned on me because, and it's explicitly spoken in the episode too. Lisbon actually says, "Oh, why? Because you like her. She can't be a suspect."
Right.
And I feel like that's happened a few times before. Do you think that's a safe thing or a reasonable thing to say?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think he's and it's disarming just in and of itself. But when he's dealing with guys, it's a whole nother ball game. He comes with a little bit more of a bullish approach, right?
Yeah.
With that. So yeah, definitely that's the blind spot right there is an attractive female coming at him with all the tricks of the trade.
Well, yeah, and I thought it's interesting because the way that Jane reacts to con people, I always find quite revealing. You know,
Sure.
he is the ultimate con man, and every
Mhm,
single con
mhm.
artist in the show says, "Oh, you're good." I
Yeah.
feel like that's an element of Jane. There's sort of a reluctance or an inability to let go of the performative aspects of his previous
Sure.
life. I thought the actress playing Brooke Harper was fantastic in this because you
Yeah,
know, and,
Lisa
and again,
Sheridan. Yeah.
kudos to Leslie who played Christina Frey. I've had some very honourable femme fatale mentions.
You brought up the fact that they are female
Mm.
con artists.
Mhm.
I mean, would you agree that that has part? What is it about a female con artist that disarms Jane more so than a male con artist?
So, you know, and I'll say this just ahead of my word, which is
Mhm, mhm.
the con femme fatale. I've also put in parenthesis at the bottom here, salad. I'll come to that
Salad.
later. That's
Yeah.
unrelated.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's something about the weaponization of sexuality that's
Okay.
really, and you see it happening in this episode in real time. I think Jane is unable to, and we've seen this a few times, there's a vanity to the character for sure,
Of
and I
course.
think that that's the performer. And I think whilst that there's an appreciation for fellow performers, there's also a sort of a sympathy or an admiration or just a blind spot or a soft spot for women
Mhm.
who are in that same kind of area of the con, you know. And
Right.
and I've
Why though? Is it because he sees himself
Well,
in
so
them?
I think
Or
there's a couple of coding things in this episode that are really interesting, right? So the con man is a very established trope. The con woman may be a little less so. Look at also Stuart, right? The gentleman
yeah,
who's in the wheelchair. I think disability and ableism often connotes as innocence. And I think
sure.
what's interesting about
Well, they say
this
as much.
episode is that ultimately we flip that on its head. So I think what I love about this episode is that it really explores tropes and expands and sort of dismantles them. What's interesting is
Right.
that we're finding as the series goes on that the more effective police work is being done with the traps and the ploys and the
Right. Right.
trickery
Right.
rather than the
Right.
actual police. And I think this goes back
Sure.
to something that we've talked about repeatedly, which is every now and again we do have to get a win for the just plain police procedural. Is it easier to be a con artist than it is to be a police person who's investigating by the book? Because there's no rules.
100%. It's easier.
Right? So the burden of proof
100%
and the
is easier.
burden of
Yeah.
investigation and justice is so much tougher on the CBI. And I think that's probably where I'm prepared to give us a break because, you
Mhm,
know,
mhm.
this episode was a perfect example of it. Jane actively encourages her towards the end. He actually says, run away. There was a touch of the Thomas
Well,
Crown
she
affair
didn't.
about
She
this
didn't
that I
walk
appreciated.
straight out. She was stopped by your stand-in, Aaron Skinner.
Well, I'm glad that you
So
mentioned that. So,
yeah,
honorable mention to our dear
little
friend
shout
Aaron
out to
Skinner. A
yeah.
little shout out to our man Aaron.
What was his
But
character's
but
name?
do you know what was really interesting about
Styles. I think was his name. Like,
it's Styles? Did you
look at
notice
that
that?
uniform, Styles?
Clearly, that uniform Styles. So I'm going to speak to your superior officer. But what I found
Supervisor.
really
Yeah.
interesting about that was that deliberate? Because you know, think years later about Brett Styles, or am I just looking a bit too
Oh
hard there?
no, I don't think one had to do with the other.
I found that quite interesting. But yeah, so for me, it was just the sort of the ease of the con and the way the episode presented it was that, you know, it's just a lot easier to be a criminal
Yeah.
and to be
Yeah.
dishonest than it is to actually uphold any sense of
Sure.
justice. And every time we try and pursue some linear police work, every questioning that we do when we go off and we speak with
Roadblocks.
Stubbs
Yeah.
Goldbrand, Roblox,
Yeah.
nothing. No, this question's this is over.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
favorite one was when you sat down with Rick Bregman, the business partner,
Right.
and Van Pelt says, "I believe you're under investigation by the SEC," and he says, "My attorney told me that I'd be expecting that line of questioning, and this is all I want to say on the matter. I'm being investigated by the SEC." And you're like, that didn't sound like you said anything, and he really didn't, you know. But I think the problem is with procedure and rules is that the inherent nature of procedure and rules means that there are ways to always evade them. Whereas
Right.
there isn't a rule book for the con man. It's make it up as you go along. I do wonder if Patrick was maybe a bit of a ladies' man. And this is something that, again, is just pure conjecture. But put it hand in hand with the performative vanity, with the maybe the slightly less congenial versions of Jane that we've seen in flashbacks. And I would imagine that there was probably a man who was a little bit vain and maybe was potentially interested in attention, female or otherwise, or what it might be.
I don't know that. I don't know that it was a little bit anything. I think his old life. That's what it was all about.
Right. The showmanship, the attention,
money, attention, all that kind of stuff. I think that's exactly what that was. He wasn't.
And it's interesting thinking about that, because that created for me a really different perspective on the whole character. It's very easy as a founding premise of our show to obviously buy into the fact that Patrick Jane is the distraught hero robbed of his life. But that also gives us a sort of an immediate license to bypass perhaps some of his previous misgivings. It makes him far more relatable, I think. It's fluctuating. He has fun. He has new relationships. Maybe he has new attractions. There was definitely a frisson there. And I thought it was very interesting when you put someone like Brooke Harper as the main sort of protagonist, because she definitely uses her sexuality. The way she breezed out of that interrogation room, I would contend that a man would have had a much harder time doing that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like she's sort of like,
and even at the end, the ease with which she says, "No, I'm not Brooke Harper. That's Brooke Harper."
Right.
And throws off the agent coming in to take her away.
Right.
It never stopped. The play never stops.
Yep. And I think when you are a career con person, I think what was so interesting about seeing Jane up against Brooke Harper in the same way as seeing Jane up against Christina Fry was it really allows you then to take a microscope to how he is, because there's a lot of the stuff that he is reviled by, but they're also the same tricks that he lives by. So that's the duality that I loved that was exposed in this episode, was that there's all this condemnation of, oh well, she's X, Y, and Z, what is it that drives you? And in those conversations between Jane and Harper, it almost feels as if he's asking her questions about himself. What was the thing that first got Jane into doing mentalism? He had a carnival background, but it was all premised on deceit. Let's go back to our bucket analogy.
Right.
One bucket of mentalists who are sincere mentalists who believe unilaterally that they have some sort of otherworldly, spiritual, or behavioral power, right?
Right.
And then you have the
bucket. Yeah.
That's the funk bucket. That is the mentalist funk legit. Right. And then you have the charlatans who say there's no such thing as psychics. This is all a joke. This is all trickery. But I'm good at this. And in a way, sort of admitting and showing that hand makes it even more disingenuous. So I feel like when he's probing these people, whether it's Christina Fry and he's ridiculing her, or whether he's getting into it with Brooke Harper and saying, what is it that really drives you? It's also a quest for himself. There must be that circulatory question of, did my decisions and my career choices ultimately cost me my family? And I think the answer is yes.
I think he reflects on that every episode, right?
Yes.
Every case that we get, whether it's a con person or not, he does reflect on that and how it affects his past and what he's done. The fact that Christina Fry and Brooke Harper are in the same quote unquote profession just brings that to the surface a little bit more.
Sure.
And his approach to it, because they have the same job, right?
But what's interesting about the whole Brooke Harper thing is that it's ultimately all just a diversion. So you've got someone who's very flashy and very performative, and that is, I'll be honest with you, this was one of the better switcheroos. I didn't see this coming in the first instance.
Yeah.
And the bit about the shoes when he's talking about, I've been checking shoes for years and it never paid off. I love that line. I thought that was great.
A note on that where what's his name, Stuart Hanson, steps up and holds the gun on Brooke Harper when they find the money.
Yeah.
I looked it up, and $10 million in cash in $100 bills weighs 220 pounds. So
I
he
was
just
going to
took
ask about that.
bag and slung it over his shoulder like it was nothing.
Yeah,
right?
that's me.
It's
That's
220
me right there.
pounds.
220 pounds.
Yeah.
That's the
He just
equivalent of
threw
lifting me.
one arm
Yeah.
just went like he could lift you with one arm. So he's an extremely
Straight out of the
fit
wheelchair.
individual. Yeah.
Grabs a 220-pound bag with one arm. We've talked about this in the core cast. I think one of the big challenges of week-over-week storytelling is to try and find characters that feel more well-drawn than just your typical sort of procedural tropes. Because we have those tropes in this episode for sure. Rick Bregman is the sort of slightly dislikable jock partner who's now having an affair with the wife who herself is a horrible piece of work, just shamelessly materialistic.
Two of the worst people. Yeah.
You know, couldn't and quite honestly, they're welcome to each other.
The two of the worst people. Yeah.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that they are nothing more than sort of procedural distractions from the slightly
they're
more
cutouts. Yeah.
interesting characters. And I think that's what I appreciate about our show. I especially appreciate that about Ken. Ken has a very layered ability to be able to say, come check this out while I'm actually doing this. And I think he does it very well. And I appreciated this episode. It had, I mentioned it briefly earlier, it had a Thomas Crown vibe about it.
Yeah.
And I think that was true of the Brooke Harper, but also what I loved, just going back to right to the start of the episode. There's a lovely beat where, and I can't remember if this is Martha Mitchell's first episode or not, but great credit to her because it felt very assured as a Mentalist episode. It felt like it kind of found its groove. There's a lovely bit when we're at the boat and there's this music starting, a little bit of Blake Neely light funk, and Lisbon and Jane are kind of watching each other, and they work in this silent ballet with each other. Have you
they're
seen
just on a
do you know the bit I mean when they're like they're looking at the body that's being pulled
and they're
up.
both thinking the same thing. It was
They're
lovely.
both thinking the same
very,
thing.
Yeah,
and I love that
really wonderfully. Yeah,
because Rigsby's otherwise engaged with feeling just ghastly, and
Van Pelt's sitting there going, "What are you guys doing?"
And I loved it, and I felt for Amanda just as an actor because I felt like we've talked about this before, but this was pinnacle facting. What Amanda had on the bow of the boat there was just facting in its extreme.
Yeah, you could definitely see it. I know that was hard to get out.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, and they are, I cannot.
It reminded me of stuff when I've had to do that, right?
I cannot explain to the folks at home how difficult it is when you get a scene and it's just all exposition.
Yeah.
Body was found at 12:28. The caliber was this, and this was this.
You can't hang your hat on anything. You're just like,
It's very hard to find an emotional through line for that. So poor Van Pelt was trying to get all of the. This is the stuff you need to know as an audience. It has everything in the title because misread is the person that you do misread. She's the flashier, more beautiful, more obvious sort of path of pursuit. How would you say this sort of fits into the overall pattern of season one?
I think in a lot of ways, this episode and this type of episode is who we are.
Yeah.
I had mentioned, I think again, we always go back to Erica's episode, Red-Handed, as being the first one to be the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think this is too unlike Red-Handed in that aspect. I think maybe this one is a little bit on the lighter side.
Sure.
Potentially. But all the things that make our show fun, all the things that took us to where we, eventually ended up with the show, I think is in this episode. And like, for example, there's a lot of other procedurals out there where the situation changes, but the presentation is always the same.
Right.
They can't get lighthearted. They're always serious. They just have this, and they are one note. And we just was never that. And it really served to preserve our sanity, I think, in a lot of ways.
I agree. And I think as the show matures as well, we begin to get a much better handle on the directors who enfranchise that vision for us. So I think consistently, I've noticed as we're closing in on the latter stages of season one, the episodes are getting tighter and they are thematically feeling more knit and stylistically feeling more like one. And we're getting a true sense of the identity. I'm really excited to be able to sit down with our guest in the finale, and talk about how the show really, really finds its conclusion, because I feel like the whole of this season has been a build, an establishing build. In that moment where we're watching Bregman and Stubbs Gulbrand get together
that
in
I
the
do
car,
remember. Yeah, that was a great moment too.
that was just such a lovely moment to see the little bit okay, clean that off there, and then me just so I was thinking that, and I felt like in that moment maybe he was gonna be brave enough to just ask her out, because we've got there. I felt like after the toilet nearly kiss, it was going to get there. And now it's sort of backed off a bit. And this is the only challenge, I think, with ensemble procedural TV, is that sometimes, and tell me about your experiences of this, sometimes you feel like a storyline is just getting there and then suddenly it gets taken away. And you're like, oh, when are we going to?
I think as far as our show is concerned, I think Bruno loves to take you there and take it away from you as many times as he can get away with, until something forces his hand, whether that be fans or the studio or whoever. But yeah, that's happened time and time again, because again, you've mentioned this before, is once they kiss, it's over.
It's over. Yeah. Exactly.
Once they get together, no more, suspense, no more tension.
And it's a terribly difficult thing to have to do. We're in a very blessed position on the TV Police because we know exactly the scope of the series. It's all mapped out for us. That's easy. And it's still week over week a challenge to be able to build something that's episodically refreshed and interesting and has new perspective. Imagine how difficult that is then, not knowing whether you're going to be coming back from season to season.
Right.
It's like, how long do we tease these things for?
Watching this episode, I was so impressed I'm still in it. 21 episodes in, I want to know about Brooke Harper and Stu Hanson and Rick Bregman or whatever his name. You know what I mean? I want to know about these guys. I want to know what the story is. I want to know what Jane and Lisbon were mentally saying to each other in that scene when they're walking across the boat. It's still fun.
I agree with you, and I think that it's a wonderful, and I guess we probably have to tip our hats to Bruno for this, but this is a masterclass in how to make a television show. And again, I go back to the conversation that I had with a friend of mine, and he recently, I know I mentioned in a previous episode, he handed me the document that Bruno had drafted as the pitch for The Mentalist. And it's all there. Yeah. I mean, literally 7 seasons all there. And sure, character names have changed, situations have been altered. But what I loved about this episode,
what was your character name in that initial Steve?
It was really weird. It was Ken Buckle. I was going to say Ken Scroggins. That would have been even worse. Detective Scroggins.
Agent
Detective Buckle. Yeah, Agent Buckle. Yeah, Buckle and Cho. Our scenes would be chuckle scenes instead of Chigsby scenes. One of the biggest challenges with writing for television and or film is knowing when to paint the broader strokes and then when to get more detailed and more focused. And this episode is a great example of that. Gaia Matrix, for example, which is the corporate setup for this whole thing, is so deliberately vague. And could you tell me what Gaia Matrix is?
Nah. Well, it's a software company. Yeah.
There you go. But it's been
a company.
painted in a broad kind of here's the backdrop. Yeah. Software company, $100 million. We'll just leave that there.
Well, it's like Carnelian Inc. It's the same company.
Exactly.
Different name. Yeah.
But for me, that was an interesting kind of, one read of it would be, do we really need to know anything more than it's just this sort of vessel for corporate greed? And I think that's all the detail you need, because that's what sets off the... Yeah. It's not about that, exactly. And what I loved is that this whole episode for me was, I wrote it down in my notes. This is what I wrote. I wrote, it's about intellectual proximity, not physical violence. And what I mean by that, it's about all the people who know or need to know. So what Jane does brilliantly is that his kind of police procedural, his police procedure, I guess, is interrogating those mind games and, true to the tagline, reading between the lies. Whereas for us, it's about establishing factual timelines. Where were you at this time? Where were you between the hours of 7 and 10? What do police think we're going to say? Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, we did it. I didn't expect you to ask me that where I was.
At its core, from the real policemen and policewomen that I've spoken to, that's the core of police work, is establishing a timeline. That's it.
Right.
Really.
But what's interesting is that the timeline usually is subject to great. I think what's interesting is that most police people would probably look at Patrick Jane and go, those emotional lines of inquiry are really, really indistinct and unreliable.
Right.
But you could also flip that on its head and saying, well, where are you piecing this factual timeline together from?
From the witnesses,
from the suspects,
unreliable witnesses, right?
Probably unreliable in themselves.
You get 3 people together who were witnessing a car accident, for example, and you're going to get 3 wildly different, series of events.
It's a very central and important thematic premise for us, and that is what makes for effective investigation. And I think what we've done now over the course of 20-something episodes is that we've now proven through his more maybe emotional or mental lines of inquiry that there is just as bona fide a police work to be done that way, as there is in our more sort of by the book way.
It's a legitimate technique. Let's just call it that.
It is. I would imagine that the best police work is probably a combination of both.
We should tag it in the finale.
Well, let's do that.
And do a message back to them, and then
that'd be lovely.
Play their video at the end of it after credits and stuff. That would be awesome.
They would love that, and we can ask them about whether they also feel disappointed that they weren't playing Agent and Detective Kendall. I've often thought to myself, what an interesting job that must be to have to voice someone who's already given the physical performance. Mm-hmm. Have you ever done that for someone? Have you ever voiced an already existing physical performance?
No.
It got me thinking it's a fascinating job, and I think if we can give a bit of love out to our voice actors and maybe even cast it further afield, let's see how many international Rigsby and Cho voice dubbing actors
if we can gather get the team together.
I would love nothing more than a whole team, a whole team of Rigsby and Chos from a plethora of different countries. I think that would be brilliant.
Let me do a quick my word just because we missed it, and it's very easy. And it needs no explanation, I believe.
Concurrent. Yes.
Concurrent. So 3 cons.
Walk us through that.
Concurrently. Well, it was just the 3 cons that were happening simultaneously or concurrently during this episode. Jane's con, Brooke Harper's con, and Stuart Hanson's con.
So let's talk about Stuart Hanson. We've spent a bit of time chatting about Brooke Harper, who was the more obvious sort of red herring, I guess. Do you know what's interesting about Stuart Hanson's character? And this was the only thing that tipped it for me, was that when a character who you've never met before is given a really kind of plumb set piece, that they're going to be someone who you have to keep your eye on. So that first moment where you and Van Pelt go and meet him, there was such a played moment of, and who are you? I'm Stuart Hanson. I'm the security guy who, and yes, I'm in a wheelchair. I didn't buy that this guy was actually in a wheelchair, and he was playing it as if he'd been in a wheelchair for a long time. I was like, I didn't get under the table and look at the shoes, and I found that he was suddenly given just a lot of attention. And and I think that that's the only challenge with a show that we've talked about this many times.
But I was still surprised.
I was still surprised too. I was
got up out of the chair. I was like, "What?" It's
for sure. And that for me was that was a real kind of it was a moment that was up there with the Tommy reveal. Was that another Ken episode? Do you remember Tommy in the arson episode?
I don't remember.
I don't remember if that was
who wrote
Ken
that.
or
Well, do you remember the title of that one?
Well, I mean, of course. Flame Red. That was Rigsby's arson episode. Episode 9, Flame Red, aired on September 29th, 2008.
That was an Ashley Gable episode.
Oh, it's Ashley Gable. Okay. Well, so that makes a lot of sense, because obviously Ken worked directly.
How can we forget
Ashley.
Flame Red?
Flame Red.
Yeah.
I mean, 18.4 million viewers.
Yeah, no, I know.
Narrowly beating out Desperate Housewives and Lost. And, not that I remember like, religiously, but those are one or two things
It's
off the
just
top
right
of
off
my
the top
head.
of your head.
Flame Red, great
that
episode.
figure?
Might go
Yeah.
back and, rewatch that tonight. In fact, I would counsel all TV police members to maybe just every now and again, just periodically go back and watch Flame Red and
Flame
remind
Red.
yourself.
If you want the quintessential mentalist episode, Flame Red.
Flame Red, and
all the
try not
boxes.
to be blown away by the dizzying depths of Rigsby's arson knowledge. This is murder. holding up
lock.
the door.
We're
looking at murder. I thought it was an absolute zinger of an episode for little Cho observational one-liners, like when Patrick Jane's drawing up on the board all the things that Brooke Harper's bought in the last 24 hours.
What is
he's
that?
like, that's a wig, and you're like, well, what's that?
Doesn't
Doesn't look like a bandage. And
Like
Jane actually looking quite annoyed by it. Like,
what is that? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's a bandage.
Just a quick note on that. On that scene,
Yeah,
that you just brought up. So it's Jane, Lisbon, Van Pelt, and Cho going over the case, and I happened to be sitting on Jane's couch. Now, this was, I think, one of the first times I ever sat on Jane's couch, and I believe who was it? Martha just wanted to pop me there. That couch has no support. It is so squishy that I'm almost sitting on the floor. I mean, it just bows and does this. And so the three of them were on either side of me, and the entire scene, I'm playing it like this. I'm going, yeah, Jane, and right.
Were you just like this?
Yeah. That's exactly what happened. Yeah. And my neck was starting to hurt because I had to hold this position, for takes and takes and takes.
Jane's couch is pretty hallowed ground. I don't think I ever sat on that couch once in 7 years, maybe in a behind the scenes video. And I think even then I said, please don't tell Simon that I sat on this couch.
Right.
It was such which begs the question, who was on that couch before Jane arrived? Because it became
here's the thing. I feel like that couch is the structure of that couch is perfect for Jane taking naps because you just sink into it. But sitting on it, you're basically sitting on the floor. So not as good. Yeah.
It's interesting. It raises, and I'm thinking again of the document that Bruno had written about Jane, who he was called Daniel Jane at the time, and he was described as this sort of like almost this scruffy, surfery-esque, seen better days. What I find interesting is that when we flash back to Jane, he's got a very polished life. He's got the Malibu-like mansion. It looks very ritzy, multi-million-dollar home. He's driving a flash BMW, and yet all the things that he holds dear in his present life, the beaten-up Citroen, the sinkable, deflatable couch, they're all sort of slightly, the ruffled suit that never changes.
Right.
They're all things that slightly have seen better days. And I wonder if that there is an intentional theme there, letting go of all the materialism. And now the things that hold dear and that are familiar are very lo-fi, just comfortable, just familiar. And, and I think that it wasn't until you said that I was like, oh, it's interesting because he doesn't have much by way of possessions. And the scene with the prince at the backgammon club I thought was really interesting too, because there's a great line where he says, oh, I'm sorry about my friend. He has he's a moralist of childish simplicity or something. A wonderful line. But when he turns down the money, it's a sharp contrast to what we imagine that character was probably like maybe several years before, where, he would have most certainly been a performer who was very available for a paid gig. Now it's not about reward.
It just reminds me when that client handed over a check in that scene, right? And outside under the veranda, under the gazebo. 100%. And she hands over this check, and he grabs it and dumps all the water out, and he's doing his thing. It's
sort of scant regard for people and more. And now you have a complete about face. And I think that what's interesting and what it got me thinking about for the first time was that we've got a central character who'd probably spent most of his life serving himself, looking after his own. And in a way, the work that he does with the CBI is, of course, it's selfishly motivated in trying to find the serial killer who killed his family. But there's also a kind of a selfless, I won't say giving back, but there is a kind of give back element to what he does in helping other people, in finding resolution for these people. And I wonder if part of that is driven by the fact that he was in his prior life so selfish and so sort of like orientated just around, this is me, you know?
Yeah.
First two letters of the Mentalist are me. So see what I did there? You know? Can't spell Mentalist without me. You know?
That's right.
But it
You're really
is
trying to
something
reach here. Yeah.
no, but it is something that hit me today. That as we were watching the episode, I was like, there is definitely a letting go of things that perhaps were held dear. You know, now he sleeps on the discarded mattress. He's on his couch. He sort of wears the same suit, the same beaten up shoes, the old Citroen. Nothing is about flash or appearance anymore. It's about function, familiarity. And I think that in itself is a redemptive arc, and it's very subtly drawn, and we're getting all of that now, even within the first season.
Yeah. And not to telegraph, but, in later seasons, his home away from home is on the roof.
Right.
That's
Right.
He retreats to the roof to think and do his thing.
Which begs the question, during this whole first season, Jane is assumedly just going home on the days that he does go home to his old family home?
That's my assumption. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then another part of me thinks, more than a couple nights a week, he literally just sleeps on that couch.
Yes. Yeah. I was sort of aware of him spending time at the CBI, but it was a sort of, to Erica's point, we don't spend a lot of time in these early seasons at home with these characters. Right. Everything is lensed through the CBI. Yeah. And it suddenly just got me thinking.
I just real quick, I just don't think he has anything that resembles what we would term as home. It's meaningless, right? I mean, the apartment or his house with a beat up mattress, that's not home.
Sure.
A CBI couch, that's not home. He doesn't have a home at this moment, right? Just starting his journey. So kind of
well, I mean, there's a powerful argument for saying that the CBI is becoming his home.
Sure.
And that we're becoming his home, and that the reason that there is probably so much of a sense of tolerance is that there is this strange mixture of our team being, yes, frustrated and annoyed, and yes, he does all of these things, but there's also a great feeling of feeling slightly sorry for him too. Van Pelt on more than one occasion has said, I feel really bad about him, and clearly I think we have overlooked maybe a certain amount of the irritating factor, because a guy who quite fundamentally we don't know what to do with. Right. This is a surviving case who won't go away. What do you do with that? I thought it was a very nice episode to sort of start bringing the season to a conclusion. I wish I could remember. I don't, but I wish I could remember when exactly we knew we were going to get picked up. We would definitely know at this point that we were going into a season 2, right? I'm pretty sure that would have come probably around the midpoint of season 1.
And to further that, we have Erica's episode next and the finale. This episode is, in the best sense, we're coasting.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a nice, we're coasting, we're getting through this one. It's fun. It's entertaining. It's all these things. The penultimate, the next one, I'm very much looking forward to, and forget about the finale. That's going to be, I think Bruno rips the doors off on that one. So
yeah. And it's really lovely to feel like now I'm coming to each episode now very much with the eyes of the audience, and feeling like I really begin to know and understand these characters. And it's been revelatory for me going through this rewatch with you, because I've really now been able to fill in some sort of gray areas about these characters that I didn't know.
Right.
We've often talked about, the nature of episodic television is such that if you're not working, you're probably either picking up post-production on something else. So the opportunity to sit down and have the luxury of being able to enjoy this, and also have the benefit maybe of 10 or 15 years just to take away the initial kind of memory of it. I can actually now watch it as an audience member and appreciate it. So for me, this was a strong bounce back after an episode that felt last week just a little bit contrived and a little bit overwrought. And I think that the beauty of this episode was it doesn't necessarily have to be too complicated.
Right.
The old adage, keep it simple, is a perfect one for this one. We had all of those elements there. This to me was Mentalist 101. It's like even the locations felt familiar. Like San Pedro, we're revisiting there. We're back with the boats. I did also appreciate the setup with the train station. I thought it was really nice, which was Grand Central Station in downtown, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something about a very, Lisbon says, it's a nightmare, like all these people. But there's something about a high traffic environment that suddenly lifts the stakes.
Right.
And I do remember filming down there. So to sort of set the context of this, what doubled as our CBI building, our Sacramento CBI building, was actually in Latin Quarter in downtown LA. Right next to that was the train station. I remember we spent a lot of time in that area. But there was something very exciting about being in a very public place. And I think, again, that just goes back to the excitement of filming a show that now has an audience and is popular.
Doing well.
And we got to be in a very high traffic area with people who are excited to be in the show, excited to convey to us how much they loved the show. And I think that from our standpoint as actors, you can become very much in a bubble. We go into work every single day, we shoot the show every single day, and you sort of lack that biofeedback. When you go out into a very public location like
You get it.
Grand Central Station, it hits you and you're like, oh, wow. And there's an excitement that lifts your own excitement. And that's the memory that I have of filming in those. There was a real sense of we're really telling something that might have legs. And that's really exciting for an actor and exciting for actors like you and I, who probably up until this opportunity hadn't had an opportunity to tell a story over multiple seasons. I know I hadn't. So I think all of this is sort of winding up this very exciting first season with a great sense of familiarity, of doubling down on tropes and themes that we already know and love, but also just returning to the fact that to make a great episode of TV, sometimes less is more. And for me, that was the watchword of this episode. We had some great performances, some very simple but bold execution, and some really, really nice affirmed direction, I thought, from Martha. It felt like, I'd be interested to go back and check whether she'd already done an episode, because if this was her first episode, she got the memo. Didn't you feel like it was very...
No, this was Martha's second episode.
Second episode, okay.
Yeah, she did Seeing Red, episode number 7, earlier in the season. Yeah.
Okay. So that makes sense, because this one felt very, very assured. And of course, it goes without saying that Blake Neely's music was off the chart.
Wouldn't know, because I didn't notice any of the music from Blake Neely.
That's when the music is doing its thing. When you come away and you went, there was music. Music by Blake Neely. I look back at this first season now and I'm like, what an epic task to have to write something with not great certainty about your forward direction and stretch those story beats over 20 plus episodes, and at any given time probably have to adjust, rush some things, take some things down, do other things. Just remarkable, and I think now, coming towards the end of this season, I'm beginning to understand, I think, why the show was so appealing, because you can clock in for the week-to-week crime, but you can also come away with enough serialized elements. And I don't think there are many shows that manage to juggle those two things quite as successfully as we did.
Well said. Yep.
And I think that now we're 2 episodes away from the end of the season, and I'm excited to see how things can tie up. But I think as an episode as a whole, I thought Misread would probably up there in my top clutch.
It's pretty great at, the example that I brought up before, Red-Handed was that for me, and now Ken with Erica, and now Ken has taken that and elevated it and put it up one more step and polished it, basically. Polished that what do you call it? Prototype, I guess, was Red-Handed, and then now it's kind of polished and is Gen 1
Agreed. It's kind of what I will do with my knitting. You know, you did the baseline layer of knitting,
Prototype.
which admittedly you didn't do, but sure, we'll pass it off as yours. And then when I come in with my TV police, not just a little like tea towel, but
and you say it.
Blanket.
You know what's going to happen is the TV police towel that I had is Gen 1. And the beginning of season 2, you're going to come up with the prototype.
Sure.
We're actually going to take a step back.
We're going to go backwards. Yeah.
So
I'm going to do a small little handkerchief.
little doily.
TVP.
Yeah, just little TVP doily is,
a little doily, yes. Yeah. Maybe a little something to put, well, not the big one, but maybe something to put. A little coaster.
There you go. Sure.
A little coaster for the merch.
Sure.
These are all things that during the hiatus, our upcoming hiatus between seasons 1 and 2, we'll iron out. And boy, when we come back in season 2, we are going backwards. When we come back in season,
we're really
stay with us as we return for season 1.
The pilot.
Yeah. I will also say, do not forget to visit the TV Police podcast website, which is tvpolice.com. Check out our merch store where you can find some of this fabulous merchandise. Tim will also be showing some wares, I believe, in the season finales. Make sure also to visit our YouTube channel, the TV Police Podcast, and sign up for memberships. It's very important that you join up for a membership because we have exclusive members-only content for our TVP members. On that front, I also want to talk to you about when are we going to do this live episode?
Ooh. Could be maybe to think about doing it as the season opener, right?
Okay, we could do that.
Season 2.
Do you feel like it would be biting off more than we could chew to do the next one live?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
I love the confidence. Oh, yeah. That would be a disaster. Very good. I'll go about the process of setting up our live then for Saturday, and I'll just start advertising it on social media.
Do it anyway. Yeah.
Do it anyway, and if you're there, great, and if not, then you know.
I'm just going to be sitting in the corner like this.
Yeah. No. Or
Just
maybe just with the lights
style.
off. Just
a silhouette.
Black square there. Yeah. And occasionally we just hear, no. This has been, as always, another fun-packed hour or so with spent with my dear friend Tim Kang. Thank you so much for joining us for our analysis of episode 21, Misread. Make sure to join us next week for the TV Police as we are going to be breaking down episode 22. Do we know the title for that one?
Blood Brothers.
Blood Brothers. Wonderful. Brothers next week.
Erica Green Swafford, writer. John Paulson, director.
Oh, that's a powerful combo right there. Very into that. Until next week, we've been the TV Police. We'll see you then.